Jean-Claude Van Damme spent decades building a reputation as one of the toughest action stars in Hollywood. Audiences knew him as the fearless martial artist capable of impossible kicks, breathtaking splits, and relentless determination. Alongside him stood another legendary figure whose name became synonymous with strength itself, Chuck Norris. For years, fans compared the two icons, debated who would win in a real fight, and celebrated them as larger-than-life heroes who seemed untouched by pain, fear, or age. Yet behind the cameras, beyond the carefully crafted public image, existed a very different reality. According to Van Damme, the greatest truth about Chuck Norris was never his strength, but the enormous burden that came with being expected to embody it every single day. As he reached his mid-60s, Van Damme no longer seemed interested in protecting old Hollywood myths or preserving carefully polished legends. Instead, he chose honesty, even when that honesty was uncomfortable. He explained that his intention was never to criticize Chuck Norris or diminish everything he had achieved. In fact, he spoke with immense admiration and gratitude. His words carried respect rather than resentment. But there was one thing he wished people had understood years earlier. Chuck Norris was never an invincible machine. He was a man. A human being who aged, experienced pain, suffered physical exhaustion, and carried emotional weight just like everyone else. The world simply refused to let him admit it. Van Damme recalled a quiet conversation that forever changed the way he viewed his longtime friend and mentor. There were no flashing cameras, no reporters waiting outside, and no publicity teams carefully selecting every sentence. It was simply two aging martial artists reflecting on lives that had demanded more from them than most people could imagine. Looking across at Chuck, Van Damme no longer saw the unstoppable action hero audiences worshipped. Instead, he saw someone carrying the exhausting responsibility of living up to an image that millions of people believed was real. Every wrinkle, every aching joint, every slower movement had become something Chuck felt obligated to hide because the public expected the legend to remain untouched by time. Van Damme believed this impossible expectation slowly transformed Chuck into a prisoner of his own reputation. Around the world, Chuck Norris had become more than a movie star. Internet culture elevated him into something almost mythical. Endless jokes claimed he never lost fights, never grew old, and could accomplish impossible feats with effortless ease. While these jokes were created with affection, Van Damme believed they unintentionally built a cage around the real man. The more people celebrated the myth, the harder it became for Chuck to reveal his humanity. Every public appearance demanded confidence. Every interview required the same composed toughness. Every photograph reinforced an image of invincibility. Eventually, the line between Carlos Ray Norris, the man, and Chuck Norris, the legend, became almost impossible to separate. Van Damme admitted that watching this transformation unfold over decades was heartbreaking. Unlike Chuck, he had spent much of his later life speaking openly about his own personal struggles. He acknowledged battles with addiction, mental health challenges, career setbacks, and mistakes that nearly destroyed everything he had built. He accepted that vulnerability wasn't weakness but honesty. Admitting failure had ultimately helped him rebuild his life. Chuck, however, chose a different path. He rarely discussed his hardships publicly. He maintained the same disciplined, stoic image that audiences had admired since the beginning of his career. To many people, that unwavering strength appeared admirable. To Van Damme, it slowly became painful to witness because it prevented Chuck from allowing himself the simple freedom of being human. One memory remained especially vivid in Van Damme's mind. During one of their later meetings, he noticed Chuck was clearly in physical discomfort. Years of martial arts training, demanding stunt work, and relentless action films had taken their toll. His body was hurting. Every movement suggested pain, yet Chuck refused to sit down, refused assistance, and dismissed any suggestion that he should slow down or seek medical attention. It wasn't pride in the ordinary sense. It was something much deeper. Chuck believed people expected him to remain the toughest man in every room he entered. Allowing anyone to see weakness felt like betraying the identity he had spent a lifetime creating. That realization struck Van Damme harder than any punch he had ever received inside a ring. He understood that the strongest man he had ever known had become trapped by the very strength everyone admired. Over the years, Van Damme tried several times to reach beyond that invisible wall. He wanted Chuck to know he didn't have to prove anything anymore. There was no shame in growing older. No shame in aching knees, tired muscles, or slowing reflexes. Fans who truly respected him, Van Damme believed, would continue loving him even if they saw the vulnerable man behind the legendary persona. But every attempt seemed to meet the same quiet resistance. Chuck would smile politely, change the subject, or return to discussing work, discipline, or training. He remained emotionally guarded until the very end. Their friendship never collapsed because of hatred or rivalry. It faded beneath years of unspoken emotions, missed opportunities, and conversations that neither man fully completed. Looking back, Van Damme felt that silence had become the greatest tragedy of all. Two men celebrated around the world for their physical courage struggled to show emotional courage to each other. They had fought countless fictional enemies on screen, but neither found the words needed to break through the invisible barrier created by decades of fame, expectation, and reputation. When Van Damme reflected on those final conversations, he no longer remembered spectacular fight scenes or Hollywood premieres. Instead, he remembered moments filled with silence, moments where both men understood far more than either was willing to say aloud. That silence stayed with him long after their meetings ended, becoming a painful reminder that even the strongest heroes sometimes spend their lives hiding behind armor they no longer know how to remove. Long before either man became an international superstar, their relationship was built far away from red carpets and movie premieres. It began during a time when Jean-Claude Van Damme was simply another ambitious young immigrant chasing an impossible dream in America. Fresh from Belgium, he arrived in Los Angeles carrying little more than determination, extraordinary flexibility, and the belief that one day he could become the next great martial arts star. Reality, however, was far less glamorous than the dream. He struggled to find steady work, barely earned enough money to survive, and often slept in his car while searching for opportunities. Most people dismissed him immediately because of his heavy accent and unfamiliar face. Hollywood had no interest in another unknown martial artist, especially one with no famous name attached to him. Yet while many people laughed at his ambitions, one person saw something different. Chuck Norris recognized the hunger in the young Belgian's eyes because he had once carried that same determination himself. At the time, Chuck was already a respected martial artist and successful actor whose career continued to rise with every new film. Instead of ignoring the struggling newcomer, he offered him work as a bouncer at one of the establishments he owned. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave Van Damme a chance to earn money while remaining close to the martial arts community he admired so much. Night after night, he stood outside checking identification, keeping order, and occasionally breaking up fights, never imagining that these ordinary evenings would become the foundation of one of Hollywood's most fascinating friendships. Chuck didn't simply employ him. He became a mentor. During private training sessions, he invited Van Damme into his gym where discipline mattered far more than fame. These were not carefully choreographed movie rehearsals designed to impress audiences. They were demanding, full-contact workouts that tested endurance, technique, and mental toughness. Chuck pushed him relentlessly, correcting every mistake while encouraging him to improve with every session. Van Damme later described those experiences as some of the most important lessons of his entire career. He learned that becoming a martial artist required far more than athletic ability. It demanded patience, humility, consistency, and absolute respect for the craft. Those lessons stayed with him long after he left the gym. Chuck also helped open the first real doors into Hollywood. He gave Van Damme opportunities to work as a stunt performer and appear in small film roles that otherwise might never have existed. They were tiny steps, almost invisible to audiences, but for a struggling newcomer they meant everything. Every extra role, every stunt sequence, every chance to stand on a professional film set moved him closer to the career he had always imagined. In many ways, Van Damme considered Chuck the man who believed in him before anyone else did. That gratitude never disappeared, even decades later when both had become household names across the world. As the years passed, however, their careers began moving in different directions. Van Damme exploded into stardom with films like Bloodsport and Kickboxer, bringing a faster, more emotional style of martial arts action to a younger generation. His incredible flexibility and spectacular kicks made him an instant sensation, and suddenly the student had become one of the industry's brightest stars. Chuck, meanwhile, remained the symbol of disciplined American heroism. His films continued attracting loyal audiences before he eventually reinvented himself through television, where Walker, Texas Ranger, transformed him into a cultural icon for millions of viewers. Publicly, there was never an open rivalry between them, but success has a way of quietly changing relationships. Their schedules became busier, their lives more complicated, and opportunities to spend time together grew increasingly rare. They occasionally crossed paths at industry events, conventions, or film productions, always greeting each other respectfully, yet something had undeniably changed. The easy conversations that once filled training sessions gradually disappeared, replaced by polite exchanges between two legendary figures whose lives had drifted apart. Van Damme believed fame itself had created the distance. While he accepted that his own life had become messy and unpredictable, Chuck appeared to become even more committed to maintaining the image people expected. Their reunion during the filming of The Expendables 2 made that contrast impossible to ignore. The movie brought together many of the greatest action stars in Hollywood history, including Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Chuck Norris, and Van Damme himself. On set, many of the actors joked about getting older, laughed at their gray hair, and openly admitted that their bodies no longer recovered the way they once had. They embraced aging with humor because they understood that audiences appreciated authenticity. Chuck was different. According to Van Damme, he carried himself with remarkable dignity, but also with an invisible barrier that prevented